Washington is on edge following yesterday's news that Defense Secretary James Mattis will be leaving the Trump administration at the end of February. The announcement came right in the middle of negotiations to avert a partial government shutdown, and one day after President Trump said that he would pull U.S. troops out of Syria. Mattis is just the latest general to plan his exit from the Trump administration. Virginia Democrat Senator Mark Warner tweeted yesterday, Secretary Mattis has been an island of stability, going on to say, quote, as we've seen with the president's haphazard approach to Syria, our national defense is too important to be subjected to the president's erratic whims. David Martin joins me now from the Pentagon to talk more about this stunning announcement yesterday. David, certainly, some of the times the president caught or seemed to at least catch General Mattis off guard. What more can you tell us about the nature of their relationship?
Well, it's true. He did catch Secretary Mattis off guard. He caught him off guard when he announced his Muslim travel ban at the beginning of the administration. He caught him off guard when he tweeted out a ban on transgender troops in the military. But those are all just difficulties, things that make it more difficult to work for this president than some other president. The real problem here is the fundamental disagreement in world views. Secretary Mattis believes in alliances, and President Trump has spent the last 2 years trashing the NATO alliance and its members, both publicly and privately. And then with this decision to pull out of Syria and to pull half the troops out of Afghanistan, he is, in essence, abandoning allies who are partners in those two wars. And that is sort of the ultimate disrespect for an ally, is to abandon them. And I think it was not that President Trump was difficult to work with. I think Secretary Mattis found it simply impossible to work with him, because now he would have to go face those allies and explain to them why they're being abandoned.
We have to think back not that long ago when the president made a really big deal about his trio of generals, right? H.R. McMaster, John Kelly, James Mattis. Now all three of them are either gone or leaving. We know that Kelly is on his way out as well. You can't help but to think these people were what many considered a stabilizing force inside the White House. At the same time, we heard in his resignation letter that he felt like what the president needed was someone in his cabinet who is more aligned with his beliefs. Is there a concern that the people who keep the president in line will no longer be there, and whoever replaces Mattis, or anyone else for that matter, will be someone who will essentially be a yes man for the president?
Well, in the first place, those three did not succeed in keeping him in line.
Good point.
The president ended up doing what he wanted to do. One of General Kelly's missions was to stop the tweeting. How'd that work out? The tweets just go nonstop. General Mattis tried to convince the president over and over again of the value of alliances, and the president just had these ideas in his mind when he came into office that the world was playing the United States for a sucker. Yeah. And these weren't allies, they were leeches on the American economy, and nothing could change his mind.
Yeah, and let's not forget, I remember the president saying that he knows more about ISIS than anyone. In fact, he knows more about ISIS than the generals. That was another presidential quote. You're talking about these allies, and Mattis wrote in his resignation letter, which you point out, that, there is an importance in maintaining a good relationship with these allies and standing up against our adversaries. What countries was he discussing at the time? What was he referring to?
Well, you can pick almost any NATO country, because at one time or another, President Trump lambasted them all for not spending enough on defense. I think his number one target was Germany and its leader, Angela Merkel. But he was after all of them on defense spending. Now, he had a point. NATO countries are not spending what they have pledged to spend on defense. But there's a professional way of doing that, and then there's President Trump's way of doing it. Secretary Mattis would often say essentially the same thing to these leaders in private. Don't expect us to pay more to protect your country than you're willing to pay yourself. But he would put it in those terms, not in terms of calling people deadbeats and threatening not to come to their aid if they don't pay their fair share. And then, of course, they're the allies on the battlefield. And that would be, right now, that would be the members of the anti-ISIS coalition. The U.S. wasn't the only country that had special operations forces in Syria. France has forces there. Great Britain has forces there. And to suddenly pull out and leave those other forces there and to pull out without any warning is a betrayal of those allies. And there's questions now about whether if the other countries keep their troops on the ground in Syria, whether the U.S. will even provide air cover for them. In Afghanistan, it's a slightly different case. The president announced a new policy in August of 2017 that the U.S. would put an additional 4,000 troops in, so there would be a total of 15,000 troops in Afghanistan. The number wasn't so important as the fact that he said there's no timetable for bringing them home. Those troops are going to stay there until there is some sort of resolution to the war between the Afghan government and the Taliban. He has now, by ordering a 50% cut in the number of troops there, he has abandoned that policy after barely more than a year.
Indeed, David. Well, I know we're going to continue to get reaction to the news of General Mattis resigning, but thank you so much for stepping us through what it all means. Thank you.
Sure thing.